Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the World Association of PPP Units and Professional session on water and natural infrastructure. We'll have this afternoon a discussion on how to close the implementation gap of water security strategies. And I would like, before going into a small introduction of what we will do today, also if you can share with us in the chat, where are you joining us from, and also you can also share with us along the process all the questions you have, or also the interest, the topics you would be interested to discuss also as part of this chapter. Before I go in to give you a very short introduction of let's say the challenges we hope to keep discussing as part of this chapter on water and natural infrastructure, I'd like to briefly introduce the roundtable and panel members of today, which you can see if it's on stage. So we have Dominique GATEL, who is Vice President in charge of Public Affairs of Water at Veolia headquarters. He was for 10 years Deputy Technical Director and previously for 11 years Head of the Research and Development Department for Drinking Water. Prior to this, he has worked in the food industry in companies like Unilever and Danone, and he graduated from the National School of Agronomy in France in food science. Dominique GATEL is member of the Global Federation of Private Water and Wastewater Service Providers, AQUAFED, and he chairs the International Committee of the French Federation of Water Entrepreneurs. Welcome, Dominique. We'll also have with us today in the discussion Anne-Laure, MASCLE-ALLEMAND. My French is quite inexistent, as you can see, but anyway, she's an economist specialized in planning, design, and appraisal of public infrastructure projects and PPPs. Anne-Laure is the executive director of PIAPPEM and as coordinator of a Mexican think tank, CEPEP, which is dedicated to training and applied research in cost-benefit analysis of infrastructure. She has advised the Mexican Finance Ministry and reviewed more than 120 assessments of infrastructure projects. She has also participated in the development of cost-benefit analysis methodologies in various sectors. As director of PIAPPEM, a training center specialized in PPP and infrastructure projects based in Mexico, and also as associate of IKONS, Guasch, and Associates, she is constantly working in the latest development in terms of the economic case for PPPs. I'd also like to introduce you to Shirina Hussain, who is the academic lead of the Sustainable Infrastructure Fellowship, a G7 initiative of Investors Leadership Network, based in Canada, but teaching professionals in the PP space around the world. She's an accomplished legal professional, academic in infrastructure and city building, and advisor connecting the classroom to the boardroom to better use leading research to shift mindsets, connect capital, develop sustainable partnerships, and solve real-world challenges. This program that Shirina leads is a first of its kind program that is designed to train senior government professionals from emerging economies on how to develop and finance sustainable infrastructure projects using different sources of non-government private capital. Shirina practiced infrastructure and tax law at a top-tier North American business law firm and has worked on numerous complex and leading commercial deal structures, infrastructure, and large-scale commercial real estate projects. Shirina has also worked at Infrastructure Ontario, facilitating the procurement and delivery of Ontario's infrastructure projects using different forms of financing, including the use of PPP. And last but certainly not least, we have Jan Villa, head of the Philippines for IL Utilities, which is IL Utilities is a global consulting firm specializing in innovation and technology in the water sector. Prior to joining IL in 2019, he spent 10 years developing water and wastewater infrastructure projects through PPPs in the Philippines and Vietnam. He led the establishment of the Collaborative Innovation Program, which launched nationwide initiatives such as the Water Technology Summit and the Conference Innovation Leadership Forum. He has managed various technology trials, such as using geospatial techniques for holistic catchment management, innovative water and wastewater treatment, real-time online water quality monitoring, and smart network pressure management. His current projects include multi-country programs funded by the ADB and the World Bank, as well as leading-edge international programs such as the Lab Innovation Program for the Australia and New Zealand water industry. I'm really happy to have you all here. If you could also tell us where you're joining us from, that would be great to know also who we have in the room. And now I would like to start with a very, very small introduction to the challenges we will be discussing with you today. So we are here today to discuss a topic that I think, as we read the news, is very much actual, and unfortunately, it becomes more challenging by the day. How do we achieve a water secure future? How we can close the implementation gap of water security strategies? And we're also happy to be launching, therefore, today, the first meeting of the Water and Natural Infrastructure chapter of WAPPP. I think COVID-19 has made us, pretty much all of us, very aware of the importance of systemic risks. We have also seen how our current economic growth models, in a way, have made that we are every time more exposed to this systemic risk and more vulnerable. As the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report says, 9 out of the 10 greatest humanity risks are linked to a lack of water. And also, as we hear on the global climate adaptation call to action in 2019, if we keep at this pace, countries, says the World Bank, could lose up to 6% of their GDP because of drought, and hundreds of millions could be forced out of their houses because of floods, for example. So we certainly need to rethink how we have been growing, and 3 revolutions are needed: in understanding, in planning, and financing. And public-private partnerships, in a way, are a little in between of all these revolutions. So we will discuss today, later, and each of our presenters will share, are the PPP models and contracts we have so far withstanding this crisis, right? COVID, recession, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And how could they contribute, not just withstand, to the solution of these problems? Another issue we're looking and recognizing very much is that nature, maybe not governments, are our license to operate. And as we see also climate change, most of the impacts will be felt through the water cycle. So the work and the discussions we'll have in this chapter are quite relevant to the future, you could say, of the world and the next generations. And we also see, as you see here, for example, to the right, seems that we have reached some of these planetary boundaries, right, for our growth. So how do we grow from here to a system where we're not trespassing them continuously? And we will also be discussing through today 3 key water risks: resource availability, flood risk, and pollution. And that brings us, therefore, to the definition of water security, right? As we see here, it has been defined by the United Nations as the reliable availability of an acceptable quantity and quality of water for health, livelihoods, and production, coupled with an acceptable level of water-related risk. So in our chapter, and that's why we have embraced the name Water and Natural Infrastructure, we're going to, of course, be looking at water and sanitation, because that's key. We have found that out more than for sure through the COVID-19 crisis. But we're also going to look at those ecosystems that actually make possible that we have that water coming to the utilities, for example, right? We will also look at water-related hazards and climate change, and also, of course, how these all 3 things together can enable a water secure future. It's in this context, in which we have realized that droughts will become more frequent, that maybe whatever we do in terms of efficiency within our plants is not enough, that nature-based solutions or hybrid green-gray infrastructures have emerged as possible building blocks of these more regenerative or environmentally sustainable models. And here we see just an example, which we won't go into details, but a combinations of natural infrastructure and gray infrastructure to give different functions like water supply and sanitation. But just to give the question is, of course, when we start to have multiple assets that guarantee multiple functions, how can we make that possible through our contracts, right? And last but not least, maybe here could be an enabler, the fourth revolution, digitalization, new technologies, AI. Could they enable us to adopt a system approach in our water investments, have much better coordinated public-private action, break silos, because we know how much, for example, an investment in good quality water could save us in health, but are we able to stream in those financing flows? Not yet, right? And of course, the most important question, how do we make possible that these enable us to lower transaction costs, but also access to finance in different territories where that's not possible? Because as we hear, maybe there is money somewhere in the world to be invested, but we don't have yet the good quality projects for them to access that funding. So that's in a nutshell what we hope to achieve through that discussion that is just starting today, but that we want to continue with you along the years on how do we contribute as a PPP community to a water secure future, leveraging private sector participation. I think everywhere, whether you talk about adaptation or infrastructure gap, it is very clear that public funding will suffice for maybe 15%, for example, in adaptation. So how do we leverage that extra 85%? And that's what we want to do with the chapter, is to keep that discussion and see if we can come to pioneering and effective mechanisms and identify knowledge and governance gaps and just contribute to efficient and financially sustainable ways to deal with these problems. So with this in mind, I'd like to start and open the floor for our roundtable members here, and also for you in the chat. Please engage and be sure that we will take all your comments in these discussions or in the next meetings of the chapter. And I would like to ask, in this case, Dominique GATEL to share with us his perspective as private operator of utilities, a very large one in the world, Veolia. How do you see, what do you see the last years? What can you share of the challenges as an?
Thank you very much, Monica, for your excellent introduction. I like your reference to the fourth revolution as an enabler for PPPs to take off. I can see that we also we are honored with the presence of Ziad Hayek to our session. So at Veolia, just to make it very short, I mean, we want to provide the best possible solution to municipalities and industries for their ecological transformation. And this is the perspective on which I will reflect right now. A few thoughts about the world of water and sanitation to concentrate on to start with. It is heavily fragmented. I don't give too many data on that. It is 90% in the hands of the in-house operators. It has a very distinctive feature financially, that is a very, very low capex to income ratio, much less than electricity and many other sectors, which cascades in water and wash services being very long-term activities. And therefore very sensitive to political interference. And for these two reasons only, the SDG 6.1 on access to water and 6.2 on access to sanitation will not be met by 2030. In talking PPPs, I mean, they are a proven solution to ramping up access to wash services. My company has experience in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, also in Niger, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, in Morocco, with the demo zones in Karnataka, and everywhere access to water and sanitation, if within the scope of the contract, I mean, was ramped up quite sharply during the time of the contract. So again, it is a proven solution to the very needed progress. It's also a suitable solution to face climate change and say this sort of risks, let's put it this way. I just take an example in the suburbs of Paris. That particular utility decided to go carbon neutral within the scope of the contract, and that is one of the 140 KPIs of that specific contract. And whilst that specific contract, I mean, has lowered the price of the water by 20% during the course of that 12 years contract. And so these efficiency gains and achievements are an asset for municipalities. Despite those results, I acknowledge that it's very hard for municipalities to go and to make bold decisions, especially when there is, how can I say that, a mismatch between what the central government wants to achieve and what the local governments want to achieve. And I believe the other panelists will reflect on that later on. But PPPs are a very secure solution, much more than ever, for two basic reasons, and I will not elaborate too much on that. First, the tendering procedures are tighter than they have ever been. And the second reason, which you alluded to, Monica, during your introduction, is that the digital strongly helps throughout the process, making it transparent from the procedures, tendering procedures, but all the way through, for example, the KPI follow-up during the life of the contract. With that, I'm done. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dominique. Now I would like to ask Anne-Laure to share with us also what are critical success factors for PPPs, especially from your experience in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thanks a lot, Monica. Thanks a lot to WAPPP. No, very honored to be part of this panel today. So I would like to share the experience we had with a recent study that we run with the Inter-American Development Bank, studying the enabling environment for PPPs, for water and sanitation in 26 different countries, which are part of the Inter-American Development Banks, in Latin America. So studying countries, very different ones, also some countries which are not so much studied, like Barbados or Suriname or Trinidad and Tobago, as well as most classical countries. So what we did is that we study the political, economical, social, technological, legal, institutional and processes, and of course the environmental environments. So at the end we ended up having some recommendations, 33 recommendations for all these topics. But what I would like, I have to summarize today. So what I would like really to stress is one of the biggest at the end recommendation we had is that the legal system has to be simplified. There is a principle in economics, or in the applied world of economics, that we call KEYS, which is keep it simple, stupid. Sometimes indeed we have to apply that, because for example, for the legal systems, to develop PPPs, in water and sanitation in Latin America. Well, of course, you have countries where it's by constitution it's impossible, but then you have countries where there are legal restrictions, but with some exceptions, So, for example, in Salvador, where it's not possible by law, but still you can do like 3 different projects, and it's written like this in the law, Or in Ecuador, where it's not possible, but still there is an exception that you can use, in order to develop. Or you have cases, where there is a PPP law, but the PPP law doesn't apply to the water and sanitation sector, for example. Or other cases where you can develop PPPs using acquisition law, concession law, and PPP. So very complex. Another thing that we did in this study is that we studied the critical success factors by the 3 different ways you can do, which is opinion of experts, review of literature, and also the case studies. And we found 4 big like critical success factor, which were like important by the 3 approaches. The first one, which already Dominique told about it, and also Sherna will talk, which is having a good structuring of the projects, that makes the project bankable, attractive for the private sector and for the financing sector, which is a very important issue, and which is also related to the funding. And by that, it's also related to our second critical success factor, which is having a strong public sector, in particular in the water and sanitation, which means having a regulator, ideally independent, that the tariffs will be set in a transparent way, based on technical issues, also very predictable. So that was also something that we stressed in this study. Another critical success factor that I imagine you are also thinking of in your countries is also having political commitments. And by political commitment is not only by the party in charge of the project, but also by other parties, and also, as Dominique was saying, at a subnational and national level, because most of the time, the two have to agree in order to go on with this project. And finally, the last one, but it's the last one because it's perhaps the most important one, is a social acceptance. We know that the water sector is perhaps one of the most complicated one for PPPs, that many people that are opposed to PPPs, and that because most of the time we don't do sufficient communication about the benefits of the project. What we are seeing in Latin America is that at the end, in a bit to preserve themselves from social acceptance, what we are seeing that most of the PPP projects, either they are through concessions, integral concession, where in a sense the private sector is a bit made invisible, so it's not charging, or is it charging, but in the name of the utility, And the other ones is that we see quite a lot of discrete assets, PPPs, so only a water treatment plant, only some potabilization water plant. So that's the most important critical success factor I wanted to talk today.
Thank you, Anne-Laure. Now, I'd like to ask Gina Hussein to share with us the perspective of institutional investors about water infrastructures, but also about water risk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you to WAPPP and my fellow panelists here today. In many ways, I'll be speaking to you about the perspective from private capital, specifically longer-term institutional investors, both debt and equity, that look upon different investment opportunities within the water sector. However, this perspective does not vary all too significantly from some of the key highlights from my fellow panelists, particularly when it comes to understanding the underlying tendering ability, the appreciation between central and subnational governments, as well as the critical success factors that were identified. However, when we start to put this in perspective, there are several headwinds that are otherwise pushing us to collide between the availability of different sources of private capital seeking investment opportunities in sustainable and resilient infrastructure, as well as the growing demand, particularly in the area of water. And post-pandemic, we're in fact seeing an influx of interest amongst different types of investors that were typically a bit adverse to investing in infrastructure due to its illiquidity components, to instead take a second look. And this is where we're beginning to see something quite paradoxical occur. There's a significant what we call wave of capital that's looking upon different opportunities all around the world, including emerging markets and developed markets, for assets exhibit characteristics such as stable long-term cash flow profile, an ability to offer stability, as well as matching some of the liabilities that, say, a pension plan or insurance company may have to what is otherwise available through an investment in an asset such as a water utility. However, that being said, we do see this, this notion that there's a demand for structuring projects that are then both investable and bankable, but there hasn't been much traction overall in this sector. And this problem is something that we have to otherwise solve sooner rather than later, because we're now looking at a longer term horizon, in which case resiliency considerations have to be taken into account. And the characteristics of certain types of investors may be amendable to helping to finance some of the much needed infrastructure investments as well as greenfield development needed. So with that regard, I'm going to share with you the perspective of some of these institutional investors, but more broadly, how different forms of private capital will look upon investment opportunities in developed and emerging markets. I would characterize this according to three specific buckets. And those buckets are drawn upon by research as well as the type of advisory work that I engage in with the investment community, as well as senior government officials from emerging markets that are looking upon attracting this form of capital. So what are those three characteristics or buckets that we have to take into account? They include, one, the enabling environment, or those macro factors, many of which Anne-Laure had already spoke to us about. So this is where an investor would be looking upon elements such as the growth potential within that country as well as that region, such as GDP growth as well as demographics. In addition, the macro stability and the business environment is quite critical. That's where the institutional capabilities of the public sector is in fact quite critical. And much of the work that's being done myself as well as with some of the individuals here today is very much about shifting mindsets to better understand how do we upskill that sector. The second major bucket that has to be taken into account relates to the opportunity set. So what exactly is that opportunity set? We're not necessarily looking at one water project in isolation. Rather, it's examining the opportunity set vis-a-vis an infrastructure program, particularly the water program with multiple different investment opportunities available. This is largely because from different investment managers or direct investors, there's a recognition that quite a lot of time and effort goes into establishing the relationships, engaging in due diligence, as well as understanding which members within the national or subnational governments they have to interact with to better understand the PPP opportunities available. And that's this notion of scalability. Is it just one project in isolation or a variety of different opportunities that would exist over the longer term? That also includes looking at the investment attributes, which was mentioned by Dominique as something that has grown quite sophisticated in the PPP space about understanding not only the resiliency and sustainability metrics, but also how to understand risk transfer and some of the unique contractual models. And finally, the third bucket relates to implementation capability. And that looks at the maturity of different markets as well as the relationships capabilities. And this is where you might see investors from all around the world look upon different water investment opportunities, but not necessarily have the in-house capabilities. Rather, they're partnering with local businesses, local utilities as well. And that's a key function that comes into play when unlocking the investment opportunities in the water sector. And finally, this is all wrapped up in the ability to engage in communication and finding the right alignment between risk appetites. And this is where we begin to see a huge opportunity for us to continue to share our knowledge and insights across the very different perspectives we have through this chapter and abroad, in order for us to then hone in and close this gap between the availability of private capital and the much needed water infrastructure. And with that, I'll turn things over back to Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirina, for sharing with us like this other perspective, right? So we have had so far, I think, the perspective of the, you could call the equity investor, of the provider really facing those risks that you mentioned on the ground. Then Anne-Laure gave us quite a good perspective of, for example, all these macro economic aspects and regulation aspects in Latin America. And you also, I think, gave us the hope that something is changing in the institutional investors community. There is more interest, but there is a big problem regarding capacity. And I would like to now pass it to Yang, because maybe he can share with us how technology is playing a role, you know, in enabling possibilities we didn't see before. So please, Yang, go ahead and share with us.
Thank you, Monica. What I really want to pitch to our participants today are the 3 technology trends that will shape or are already shaping the evolution and future success of water PPPs. And those 3 trends are, first, smart technologies, second is decentralization, and third is nature-based solutions. First, with smart technologies, I think everyone's pretty familiar with the benefits of digitalization and going smart. But it's useful to think of going smart as being of 3 levels. The most basic one is data capture, ability to collect, store, and present information. The second level is decision support, the ability to analyze and gain actionable insights from those data that we capture. And the third is full automation, which is using closed-loop, remote, and minimal human interference. And the overall objective is efficiency. Well, what we have to understand is efficiency is utility and context specific. One utility would say that for them, efficiency is all about minimal downtime. Another would say, oh, it's all about early detection of shocks or failure prediction. And almost everyone would say efficiency is all about cost savings. So the trick here for water PPPs is to understand which level of being smart will unlock the best value for their business. For example, in the area of water quality, level 1 is simply understanding water quality characteristics using advanced instrumentation. Level 2 is working with big data to optimize treatment, and level 3 would be to fully automate your water treatment plant based on AI. So we're not saying that every utility and every water PPP business should go to the highest level. It's about understanding what is it that your business needs. The second key technological trend is decentralization. And the idea here is not to replace all of our centralized network with decentralized systems, but to use decentralization as a complement where a centralized system is challenging or has not been very effective. For example, in urban poor areas or in remote areas that are very susceptible and vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic because they don't have basic water services and sanitation. And what's exciting about decentralization is that financial returns are no longer tied to scale. Suddenly, there is potential to increase service coverage and deliver using new models, using smaller scale technology. An example I can give here is solar powered desalination that would require minimal O&M effort that can now serve and open opportunities in coastal villages at a decent return. And suddenly, small-scale desalination is no longer just for the high-end resorts here in the Philippines. And the final technological trend is nature-based solution. And you wouldn't probably think of this as a technology. It's not a hardware like the ones that we just talked about. But NBS, or nature-based solution, can really either be a substitute or a complement to conventional gray infrastructure, which gives rise to what Monica brought up earlier, which is blue-green infrastructure. And the beauty of NBS is that it is potentially cheaper, easier to implement, more adaptable in the face of climate change. It also unlocks multiple benefits, or what we call co-benefits, that can improve the economic valuation of our PPP projects. The example I can think of here is constructed floating wetlands as a complement to stormwater retention or wastewater lagoons, which improves treatment performance because it reduces nutrient and sediment loading, but also enhances the property, amenity, and ecological values of the surrounding areas of your wastewater or stormwater lagoons. So why are these 3 trends important to PPPs? 3 reasons. Number 1, because they give rise to new revenue streams and new service models. An example I can give is how Australian utilities are trying to unlock household level grey water recycling and resource recovery. Now that is a new business model for water PPPs. The second is that these technologies will support long-term sustainability, which is essential for long-term PPP contracts. We're talking about 30-year contracts, and that requires ability to meet the uncertainty that will be brought about by climate change and other external factors. But most importantly, the third reason why these are important is because new technologies should be used to meet the SDG 6 targets. We can't use the same methods that got us to where we are today in order to get to where we need to be in the future. And achieving universal access, which is everyone's priority, requires multiple options. There's no one size fits all. And the good news is that the technologies already exist.
Thank you, Jan. Now, I would like, I'm waiting for some questions from you, from the audience. It would be great if you can also direct your questions to the panelists, and I'll be happy to pass them to them. But in the meantime, I also would like to know, we seem to have, there are all these challenges and all these opportunities. How do you see the PPP models evolving? No, I think in the opening session or the one after, also Siad was saying that he saw more innovations and creativity in the past. Do you see through digitalization at the different levels or smart technology that you show, Jan, the introduction of nature-based solutions? So when we see all these elements changing, how will the PPP contracting change? What can we do as community of practitioners to enable also emerging economies to leapfrog, right? I think that was also brought earlier by the representative of the World Bank, because it's like so hard to get that capital to these countries. There is so limited capacity. Can we keep up if we just do it in the way, for example, we have done it in Europe? So yeah, please just feel free to share. And this, let's for a moment just be free to rethink, right? We don't have to have the real proven formulas now. It's just as a meaning to exchange our most, we could say, creative ideas. Who would like to start? All, please open your microphones. Siad, you're also much welcome to to discuss with us.
If I may, Monica, I'd give a very quick example of decentralized and smart water kiosks that are already serving the typically underserved populations in developing countries. And this has been a step change innovation where centralized systems have failed to really reach the most vulnerable and marginalized sectors of the population. Decentralized technologies were able to reach them. So I think there is an opportunity for more PPP investments to go here.
Chirina, would you like to reflect, for example, on that new type of investment?
Yes, and this is where I have so many different responses to you, Monica, but I will just summarize them in the way in which introducing new ways of being able to deliver services, offering new opportunities to introduce innovation and rethink different payment mechanisms are an opportunity to not only address service issues, but also to then offer a return to different forms of private capital providers. And this is one of the tensions that have begun to emerge when we're in the PPP space, namely, on one end, being able to streamline a lot of different risk transfer processes, having matrices that are quite templated, have otherwise meant that the opportunity and the return for those opportunities amongst different private sector participants, particularly those taking on some of that risk, such as investors or certain types of lenders, are then mitigated or minimized to a point whereby they're not quite incentivized to start thinking in that direction. So if we want to use this as an opportunity to rethink, introducing those mechanisms must also be translated with an opportunity to then share some of the return the potential that comes with it. So I would probably summarize this as saying, rethink your risk return when we're engaging in these PPPs, because the return doesn't just have to be financially. It could also be an opportunity to service other areas and other populations that traditionally through existing PPP mechanisms are not quite taken into the fold because those processes don't quite align the incentives of different participants to move forward and rethink that process.
Thank you, Chirina. Dominique, I think you wanted to share with us some thoughts. Oh, no, maybe. Sorry.
Who did you give the floor to? I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I was thinking, I think I saw you thinking along. So if you would like to share with us, for example, how do you see it as a as normally a company who has served maybe more centralized systems, how do you see that the moving towards the centralization? Which opportunities or challenges do you see ahead?
I think there's two solutions. I think Yang did put it the right way. They are very complementary solutions, and especially in the geography that Yang is involved with, we see that that has taken place already something like 10, if not more, years ago. And so there is a genuine complementarity. At the same time, again, in some countries, the national authorities, realize what opportunity it is to, again, make use of these decentralized possibilities, including possibly kiosks or whatever. In some other geographies or states, the tendency of the local administrations is to rely exclusively on centralized solutions. And that is reflected in the way they conceive the system, by the way, with or without PPPs being involved. So I think that, yes, it's a very promising solution. Again, I can see that in the Philippines and in other geographies. I can see a number of countries where decentralized solutions would be helpful actually to connecting the underserved populations, but yet again the local administrations resist to putting a foot in a system that doesn't look like the system they're familiar with. But again, it is a very promising solution.
Thank you, Dominique. I think you touch upon something that we in all sectors find difficult, and that's to change, from the status quo. Anne-Laure, are there any thoughts on this? Did you see this also happening in Latin America, or some reflections on the regulatory framework that should accompany such processes of change?
I am. Yeah, indeed, it's one of the issues that we studied also, like the decentralized decision. In some countries in Latin America, it's much more like centralized, and at the end, the central government is deciding about the projects and designating. In other countries, much more municipal, at the end, a municipal initiative. Always a problem, as I said also before, is institutional capacity. It's even more complicated to develop it at the municipal level. And it's one of the challenge, to be able to really build, this capacity, at a municipal level. So that's a complicated challenge.
Thank you very much to all of you. We trying to close on time. I'd like to thank everybody that joined us. We actually want to continue this in a much more interactive setting, where we can just encounter each other and exchange practices, lessons learned also from not so much successful projects as well as very successful ones. So it would be great if you can, join the chapter, join us. And the idea is that we will be together with the regional chapters, like the Southeast Asia one, the African one, all of them doing also discussions around these water investments, and also as a thematic chapter continuing these discussions. As you see, one of the ideas is we really want to see how to get investments that cover, and in a way internalize some of those climate and water risks. And maybe that thinking of, for example, upstream, downstreams, like Yang was telling us, through the nature-based solutions and hybrid strategies. So I hope you enjoyed. This was just like a first discussion to set the scope of the chapter, but please, contact us, try and help and work with us in keeping this discussion going. Sia, do you want to share with us some final ideas and thoughts?
I just wanted to thank you, Monica, and thank the panelists. Great discussion. There's a lot to be discussed and said. Love to have you. Anne-Laure, thank you always for contributing a lot to our Slack conversations. I really appreciate that. Yang, Shirina, great to see you. Dominique, of course, always wonderful to have you. And thank you very much.